Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
Monotheism is belief in one God and only one God, and that is the reality, period, end of discussion. No other gods exist. All right, and any belief in any other gods is a denial of your faith. Okay, so that's pure monotheism. As I was saying, Deuteronomy of all the books is the one that amplifies this the most, and you can find echoes of that in the historical books of the Bible, from Joshua through Kings, in terms of the ideals that are set out, and many of the prophets also, of course, reflect this. So, but there is, as we will see in a moment, there are other forms of worship of God that are mentioned and even seen actively being practiced in ancient biblical times. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 35, this is a line that you know if you go to shul on Simchat Torah, because it's the beginning of the calls that lead into the Hakafot, the marching around with the Torah. Okay, so Deuteronomy 4, chapter 4, verse 35. In fact, you can even sing it with me. Well, you probably want to sing louder than I will, because you want to drown my voice out, but that's okay. Are you there? Deuteronomy 4:35. Ata hareta lada'at ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim einot milvado. Sound familiar? Okay. You have been shown to know that Adonai, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, is ha-Elohim, is the God. Ein od milvado. There are no others other than He. That's pretty categorical. It doesn't say Elohechem, I am Adonai, your God. It's a universal statement. Okay? And it's clear. Ein od, no others. That's monotheism. Got it? Okay. Now, going down the ladder, the next one is what we call monolatry. Okay? Monolatry. M-O-N-A-L-T-R-Y. This is, we worship only one God. We may recognize that there may be other gods, but we will not worship them. Okay? We will not worship them. Now, this can be found in some of the older strata of the Torah. So, for example, if you look at Exodus 23, 4 and 5, what does it say? Exodus 23, 24, and 25. 23, 24, 25. I'm cutting out some intermediate words. Lo tishtachaveh le'Eloheihem v'lo ta'avdem. Do not bow down to their gods and do not worship them. And the next line in verse 25, ve'avadata ata et Adonai Elohechem. You shall worship Adonai your God. So there is no actual renouncing of the existence of other gods. What it is saying is they may exist, but don't worship them. Okay? Don't worship them. Tybal.
Somehow I got the citation wrong. I'm looking at 23, 4, and 5, and it's about...
No, 24 and 25. I corrected myself. 24 and 25.
Oh, the whole chapter, not the verb. Got it.
No,
okay.
Just the end, just those verbs, those two sentences. 24, 23, and 24, and 25. Yeah, I'm sorry. 23, 24, 25. Okay. So those two verses basically they do not say, it's not like Deuteronomy only. If there are other gods, don't worship them. Okay. So that's an example of that. We'll see more of that later. Then there was called henotheism, which is, again, heno means one, but here it's this. We worship the supreme God, but we recognize there are other gods, some of whom comprise a pantheon over which the supreme God rules. Okay? Now, we don't have mention of this in the Bible per se, but archaeology would indicate that this was the case. And we're going to discuss this in greater detail in a moment. I have pictures to show you. But we talked about this once before, I think. I will show you pictures of Tel Arad, and I'll show you pictures of Tel Dan, okay, where we see matzevot, pillars, standing stones, and there's more than one. And the point is, these are understood as these are representations of deities, and these were Israelite cultic sites. Okay, and so today's archaeologists, who are open, shall we say, to letting the facts, so to speak for themselves, will say these are places that, in fact, the prophets refer to. Okay, and they existed, and certain things, the concept of a consort for God, a female goddess who is worshipped along with God, takes on different shapes and forms, which we will talk about a little bit later on. But the fact is, that was a target of the prophets and the Deuteronomic school when these stronger monotheistic principles began to take hold. But this is according to the Bible what people worship. Okay, so that would be henotheism, of supreme God with lesser gods, if you will. This is different from the B'nai Elim that we talked about in the Psalms, which would seem to be something else altogether. Okay, all right. And then finally, polytheism, which of course is the major bugaboo here, which means, of course, the worship of multiple gods, of equal power, fighting each other. All of the mythologies that you see in the literature of the ancient Near East and the pagan world represent this. There are some signs of, in Egypt, there was a moment there where it appeared that some form of monotheism may be emerging, and this was in the 14th century BCE. But it was short-lived, and it's hard to make a lot of to really figure out what that represented, if it was actual monotheism or henotheism. And some people used to argue that that's where Moses got his ideas. That doesn't sit well with me. All right. Anyhow, so these are the four terms: monotheism, monolatry, henotheism, polytheism. Okay. Now, we can see in biblical texts that this tension exists, and you can almost see a kind of an evolution in some of the texts. And there are a few texts actually internally that seem to be moving from point A to point B. Okay, so now I want you to turn to the book of Psalms. All right, and these are Psalms that make up the Kabbalat Shabbat, some of these, okay? All right, so we're starting with Psalm 95, okay? Psalm 95, verse 3. Just want to get here for the context a minute. Okay. All right, so this is, this is the beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat, right? Psalm 53, L'chuna Ranana. Yes, you're familiar with it. Okay, so there's this line here in Psalm 95, Ki El Gadol Adonai Umelech Gadol Al Kol Elohim. Right? Adonai is a great God and a king God over all the others. All right, so this would be an example of monolatry. Okay, in other words, we are not saying that you should worship the other ones, God forbid, But our God is the supreme God. There exist others, but we don't worship them. It doesn't explicitly refer to the second part of what I said, but I believe that would be the implication here. Okay? All right. Bert.
Just a question on the English translation of divine beings. Is it translated that way to avoid saying other gods?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a hesitancy among translators to come right out, and affirm that the monotheism in certain stages in ancient Israelite tradition was actually not as pure as we would like it to be.
Because even in Deuteronomy, I think there's that phrase Elohim Acherim.
Yeah, but
gods you didn't know, that somehow there's
right,
gods you know and gods you didn't know.
Yeah, but there's a mention of that. We're going to see it, okay, in terms of what they are, and you see the same thing in the Psalms we're going to look at in just a minute, okay, where they refer to other Elohim, but then they say Elohim Acherim Elilim. They're only idols, okay, which is in a sense a denial that they really are gods.
Isn't that sometimes translated as no gods?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, but but I don't. They're trying to explain the Elo. I don't know. I'm not going to get into that discussion. Okay, all right. Now, but see that. Well, that's what's coming up right now. So look at Psalm 96, verses 4 and 5. Okay. So first, this is in the same Psalm. Ki gadol Adonai mahulal ma'od, right? 96, 4 and 5. Right? For God is great and greatly praised. No rahu al kol Elohim. He is awesome above, he is compared to the other gods. He is no ra, right? He's awesome. Yes? But then look at verse 6. Ki kol Elohei ha'amim elilim. Adonai shamayim asa. Because all the gods of the other nations are idols, right? But God made the heavens. So all of this picks up on a Deuteronomic concept, which we're going to look at, that the heavenly host, then people may think they're gods, but God made them. So where's the gods? Okay, so but this is within the same psalm. It's almost as if it's picking up on what 95 said and saying, okay, that may be the case, but the reality is this, that they're mere idols. They're non-gods, right? They're non-gods. Okay. Now the codes in the Torah are rather clear regarding pagan or pagan-like practices. And now I want to focus on this concept. Okay? Pagan-like practices. All right, so here, yes, let's go to Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 to 4. Before you get there, what is in Exodus chapter 20? What text do we find there?
Is that the Big Ten?
Yeah, the Big Ten. Right. Oh, you're a football fan.
No, I am emphatically not. Despite being a Pittsburgh native, and I know this is recorded, I think professional sports leads to war.
Okay, fine. All right. So, 10 Commandments, right? Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim bibeit avadim. Right? I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Lo yelecha Elohim acherim al panai. Right? You shall have no other gods before me. Lo ta'as. Now here's the key line here. I mean, it says you shall have no other gods. It's not clear here if this is the denial of the existence of those gods or simply saying there may be others out there, but don't follow them. I'm not going to get into that right now. This is Exodus. It's not Deuteronomy, but Deuteronomy says the same thing there. Remember Deuteronomy 5, 6 to 8 is going to be the similar thing in Deuteronomy, the other set of 10 Commandments. All right? So, Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel b'chol tmuna asher b'shamayim mima'al ve'asher ba'aretz mitachat. Don't make any image, any idol, any image of anything that is in the heavens above and on the earth below. Ve'asher b'mayim, and what's in the water, mitachat la'aretz, the water below the earth. In other words, that's sort of talking about Tehom, which is often seen, this goddess who is a huge, big shark or big fish of some kind. Lo tishtachav elahem v'lo ta'avdeim. Don't bow down to them, don't worship them, right? Okay, so you only worship God and do not make any images of any other creatures, any other creations, in the sky, on the earth, or in the water. Okay, covering all bases. Okay. All right? So that's the point. Now, by the way, if you think about it, that was the problem with the golden calf, right? Because the golden calf, or if you will, young bull, is an item, even if you say that is God, right? And there's debate among Bible scholars whether the golden calves that's mentioned, later on in Exodus, or in Exodus 32, or the golden calves, there's one golden calf there, or the golden calves that King Jeroboam put up in his two temples, one in Beit El and one in Dan, Tel Dan, one in the south, one in the north. Okay, so there are discussions whether those were intended to be literally representations of Hashem, or if they were intended to be a chariot of Hashem, the way the ark in the Jerusalem temple was a chariot or throne of God. Okay, so they sort of depends, and I'm not going to get into that debate. From the perspective of the Bible, both in Exodus and Deuteronomy, it's idolatry. It's a horrible, horrible sin. Okay? All right, but that debate exists. Okay, but again, the problem with it, and I don't know what the Ten Commandments in the North said, okay, but clearly, if you set up a golden calf in your temple and worship either the golden calf itself or the God who's invisible sitting on the golden calf, it's still a violation of this, because it is a representation of a creature that God created on the earth, and this prohibits that. Bert.
Is the prohibition here of making those images at all, or making them for the purpose of worship? I mean, having a picture on your wall of an animal.
It says b'chol tmuna. It says it right here. Any image.
So strictly speaking, any image of anything.
Yes, you can't make an image.
Even if you don't bow down, even if it's not for the purpose of worship.
That's what it seems to be saying.
Okay.
Because somebody might see it and you might induce that person who's an Israelite to say, oh, you have a picture of the Baal here. I'm going to stop and pay him homage. I mean, but it says, pesel I know. Okay, that's generally a word used for idol. Tmuna means an image, right? Literally. So, I mean, because it's probably going to be that may have in mind is the way the Asherah ended up being represented, which is a wooden pole instead of a tree. Okay, and you had the websites, the worship sites that the prophets will refer to. Okay, will actually specify the Asherot. Okay, or a tree, a wood, So that is not necessary. I mean, it's a pestle, but it's not a pestle. The same thing with a matzeva. This doesn't make reference here to a matzeva. That will appear in later sources. A standing stone. But
so
stones are not. It's not technically. it's not like it functions like a pestle. But normally you say pestle, you're talking about something that has some sort of artwork in it, some sort of representation in it.
Why wouldn't this then, I mean, I'm talking very traditionally, apply to photographs, like the photographs of a rabbi?
Well, that's something that, yeah, I mean, that was an issue. Okay.
I know there are some Jewish sects that have pictures of their founding rabbis everywhere.
Right. And even, the Rebbe's picture, there are certain groups of Chabad people who actually put a picture of the Rebbe on the eastern wall of their synagogues. So, I mean, yeah. But, obviously there's a certain point where they become more open to those things because they really lost that kind of, concept of relationship.
But there is always.
You got Rebbe cards that I don't know if they still have them. Like we used to have baseball cards, my Rebbe heroes, all these great rabbis. There's pictures of them, and they exchange them, so forth, So, all right.
And potentially the danger of worshiping.
Yeah.
The people.
Yes. All right. Yeah, exactly. Tybal.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. I wasn't sure. I was thinking of those Rebbe baseball cards that get traded. When one thinks about that in conjunction of the same communities that trade Rebbe cards will block out photos of female diplomats and elected officials.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they're two different kinds of problems, but when one thinks about that in this context, to me, it's sociologically interesting. You can trade the Rebbe cards, but, forget we should see whoever it might be, Madeleine Albright.
There, it's different. It's dealing with pictures of women that are not modestly dressed. Remember?
No, I think it's the faces, because even the modestly dressed ones blocked out.
Look, I mean, the truth is today we have Haredi women who cover their faces. They look like Muslim women. And there are some who do, very extreme groups. They do. Yeah. All right. So this is an example then in terms of, we're looking at forms of worship. Okay. So here now, Exodus 23:24. Okay. We looked at 24 and 25, but now this is what precedes that. So Exodus 23, verse 24. Okay. The whole verse. And I'm looking at 23:23 also. Okay. All right. So, when my messenger shall go before you, I'm sorry. I have writing on here. It's blocking out the vowels. Okay, and I will destroy, and I will overcome him. All right, when my malach, in this case, it's probably the pillar of fire and pillar of smoke. Okay, and brings you to the land of these nations, and whom I will destroy. I will, get rid of. Lo tishtachave Elohehem v'lo ta'avdem. Right. All right. Do not bow down to their gods and do not worship them. The lo ta'asekem asehem, and don't do the things that they have done. And that refers to Elilim, which you can see in Psalm 96, verse 5. In other words, the things that they have made. But rather, what do you have to do with those things that they made? Hares taharseim, destroy them. Vishaber tishaber matzevotam, and smash their matzevot. Now you have a reference to matzevot, the standing stones. Okay, we're going to see that's a biggie, the standing stones. And I think I may have mentioned that archaeologists will tell you that the Israelites who worshiped with standing stones had two varieties. In the south, the tradition was not to put any artwork on it, any depictions. In the north, they would do depictions. They would put artwork on it of some form. Tybal, that may be what you were talking about earlier when we were having our discussion before we started. Okay, so there's a difference in the tradition as to how this idolatry was played out between the south and the north. Okay, so destroy them. If you worship them, verse 25, worship God, and he will bless all these other things, and I will keep disease away from you. Okay, so again, this is what you have. This is regarding a defining of what you should not do in terms of idolatrous practices. Okay, now moving on, Leviticus chapter 26. Lo ta'asu lachem elilim. Don't make for Leviticus 26:1. I will pause so you can get there. Leviticus 26:1.
Rabbi.
Yes, Mark.
Yeah. Was Judea more isolated from the trade routes in polytheistic practices than the north was, going through the Via Maris and through the
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to say because we know that there was idolatrous practice going on in Judea already around the year 800.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, actively. Remember that it's hard that there are probably, well, later on I'm going to show you a map of locales where they have found evidence of Israelite idolatrous practice.
Okay.
So let me hold off and I'll answer that when we take a look at that map because I haven't memorized the whole thing. But
Okay.
I remind you that the population in the north was much more dense than the population in the south. So I guess by the number of people present, you're going to have more places than in the south.
Well, it was more urbanized because of the trade routes.
But the trade routes came through the south too. Remember, I mean, Jerusalem was a center for trade. And there were areas there, and the coastal route is in the south. It's along the coast of the, but it's part of the south benefits from that as well. But of course, the reality is that a lot of those areas there were Philistines, but that's good up until the year 1000. After 1000, the Israelites, moved into some of those areas and, took over there. Although the fact is, no, the Philistines stayed there. Later on, I think it was the Persians or the Greeks that ultimately wiped them out.
Mm-hmm.
So they remained there. But, again, the Negev, the desert areas, they probably ended around the point where Beersheba and Arad are, that far south, because those were two of the outposts. There were fortresses there. So those fortresses protected the southern boundary. So that was basically the southern boundary. Then, of course, as you go upwards from there, then you're coming into areas of Benjamin and Judah that were more densely populated, and where you find, there some of them had idol worship. They know both at Arad and in Beersheba there were bamot, high places, unauthorized, according to Deuteronomy, and that comes from Josiah's list of what he shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so. But again, we'll see on the map, and it'll answer the question.
Okay.
All right. So Leviticus 26:1. Lo ta'asu lachem elilim. Don't make idols ufesel umatzeva. Right. Don't make whether they are, idols that are with decor or matzevot. Possibly we're talking here about. This is Jerusalem priesthood, so it's southern. So plain stones. Don't set them up. Lo takimu. Don't, because when you took the stone and stood it vertically, then that's an indication you're going to worship it. It's not lying flat. It stands up. All right. Even maskit, again, a stone, apparently a cut stone, right? As opposed to a matzeba, which may be the plain stone. You should not put them through in your land, and you should not lishtachavot lahem, that you should bow down to them. Ki ani Adonai Elohechem, because I am the Lord your God. Then it says that Shabtotai tishmoru umikdashi tira'u ani Adonai. So you should follow my Sabbaths and stand in awe of my holy place, mikdashi, right? I am the Lord your God. Okay, so by the way, it's very interesting as an aside. Shabbat is often mentioned in juxtaposition with idolatry. Think about it. The second commandment, right, deals with idolatry. The third commandment deals with taking God's name in vain, which may also have certain misuse of God's name associated. Okay, and what's the fourth commandment? Shabbat. And there are a number of places where you have statements like this. Think about Vayikra, the beginning of Parshat Kedoshim. Okay, in fact, the first thing it says, "You be holy, for I, Lord your God, am holy." Ishavi v'imo tira'u. A person should honor or have fear of one's mother and father. That's Shabtotai tishmoru, and follow my Sabbath. And then it says, don't put up idols. So again, Sabbath and idol, it's almost as if it's saying that a major negation of idolatry will accompany the worship of Shabbat. Somehow it helps, it's a prophylactic against idolatry. Okay, because if you think about it, it is, first of all, it was very unique in the ancient world. And second of all, it's a celebration of God's resting on the seventh day, having completed the process of creation. And if you look at it from the perspective of Deuteronomy in the Ten Commandments, it's a result of, it's an emphasis on the freeing of the Israelites from slavery. So in either case, it's talking about the power of God either as creator or as redeemer. And so if once a week you get an injection of that kind of faith in this great God, perhaps it will be a prophylactic against idolatry. But it's interesting that those two, that's my suggestion. All right, so Tabel, is that from before, or you have another comment?
No, I don't have a concordance, so I can't do the same thing, but I just went to Bereshit 28:18-22 to see when Jacob did, what words were there, and they're the same word. I mean, when Jacob did it, somehow that stands alone at what became Bethel. I know, it's just interesting to me, it's the same words later.
Hold off. We will be going there momentarily. Okay? We're going to get there. You are prescient. You're thinking of things before they happen. Okay, good. Bert.
I just want to say that Shabbat is about time. Shabbat is about time.
Time.
T-I-M-E.
Yes.
Okay, and idols and all of that is about matter.
Yes.
So you have that juxtaposition as well. I mean,
yes.
The Exodus and creation is about the why, but what is Shabbat? Shabbat is time. There's nothing material about it.
Correct. I mean, and the fact is also creation and the Exodus are divine activity that transcends, if you will, the material, because God in each case is bending the material to God's will, right? In both instances, using nature to make a point. Yeah? So Genesis 1, it's the creation nature exists. The story of the 10 plagues is the antithesis. God is undoing nature and unraveling it, to bring Pharaoh, to his knees. So in that sense, yeah, but it's time, cosmic time, if you will, is being invoked or is being manipulated here. 7 days, right? 10 plagues, time, and they're all time bound. Moses tells Pharaoh, in 2 days, this is going to happen, whatever. So it's all planned. It's clear the way the plagues are set out. It is clear that when they were put together, that the author wanted us to understand that this is a managed experience here. The first 3 deal with the land, the second 3 deal with the air, and the third, it's water, land, and air, right? Beyond. And then the 10th plague is off the charts. And Nachum Sarna has a lot of discussion on this, and he's absolutely right. It's an indication, that structure is an indication of the power of God associated with both the creation and the Exodus. So I'm just elaborating basically on what you said, right? Because that's the invisible, immaterial God. Within certain time frames is either creating or unraveling. It's the same thing when we read the flood story, right? You see the timing of all these, especially in the priestly tradition, but even in the J tradition, right? So many days, a very precise time is being controlled by God. So that's what Shabbat is as well. So I'm just making a bridge. I'm expanding what you're saying. Okay? All right. Now, moving on. Yes. Now let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 16. Okay? Verses 21 and 22. Okay? 21. Lo tita lecha asherah kol eitz eitzel mizbach Adonai Elohecha asher ta'aseh lach. Okay. Do not plant a tree, an asherah, or any tree. So what's the difference between the asherah or any tree? Our scholars tell us the asherah refers to the wooden pole, okay, a man-crafted pole, which was used in lieu of a tree, because, if you want to build a tabernacle a worship place for God, and you got to plant a tree, by the time it grows and reaches the point where it makes you want to be worshipful, you got to be very patient. When you build a sacred place, you want it up right away so I can worship. So you simply chop down an existing tree and you go to a wood craftsman and they shape it into a pole of some kind, and you stick the pole in the ground in lieu of a tree. So that's what this is saying, either whether it's a wooden pole or a tree, or you may build the flip side, of course, is you can choose a site that already has a tree, and we're going to look at that, and use that as your Asherah. Okay? So, do not do that near an altar for God that you might make. Now, this is really interesting because it is assuming that you're going to make an altar. But this is Deuteronomy. What does Deuteronomy say about worshiping? Offering sacrifices. This is a mizbeach. It's an altar for sacrifices. What is it suggesting here? Is it suggesting that you're going to build a local shrine with a local altar? Can't be, because Deuteronomy says there's only one place that you can offer sacrifices. So it sounds as if what it's saying is you should have no depiction of an Asherah in your temple. Do you understand what I'm saying? Deuteronomy bans local shrines. It says so explicitly in verse 12. The place where I cause my name to dwell, that's where you will offer sacrifices. You want to eat meat? You make meat now without sacrifices. Just follow the rules and make yourself kosher meat. The first definition of kosher meat is Deuteronomy, who is saying, since you can't go to a local shrine and offer a thanks offering, or a peace offering, and you get your hunk and you take it home and cook it, that's how people ate meat beforehand. But there were shrines all over the place, so it wasn't such a schlep. But, you can't go if you're living up north, let's say you're living 10 miles north of Jerusalem. You're going to go 10 miles south to the temple, offer a sacrifice, and go back home and eat? Probably not. So Deuteronomy says, shech the animal yourself, spill the blood in the ground, and esgezunt, but no sacrifices. So clearly, this must be talking about a temple. Now the question is, is there any reference to any kind of idolatrous imagery or anything in the temple in Jerusalem? Do you know of any? I do.
Only much later when the Romans defiled it.
No. Hezekiah takes out a nechushtan, a bronze serpent that was inside the temple. Okay? That was being apparently worshipped. Josiah takes out an image of the Queen of Heaven, takes it out of the temple. This is now, so Hezekiah is around 710 BCE. Josiah is around 620 BCE. That's the temple in Jerusalem. The point is, this may be alluding to the fact that you shouldn't bring any imagery of a female deity into the temple as what Josiah found. That's treif. That's grounds for destruction of that temple, which of course it was. So I'm just suggesting that that's the only way I can understand this statement. Otherwise, it would say if you build for yourself an altar, all it is, then don't put it by a tree. That makes no sense. Because you can't build for yourself an altar. Okay, all right, so Bert and Tybal.
Just quickly, to what extent was this actually political, with the priesthood trying to establish that a monopoly over prayer?
Well, it's a monopoly over sacrifice.
Not sacrifice, yeah.
But
worship. There seems to be this tension.
Okay, where do you draw the line?
Right. Okay. Well, there's Temple Beth Am. There's a lot of synagogues that call themselves temple something now.
Yeah, but that was just that has nothing to do with the nature of the worship. That was right. Because the Reform movement started it because they didn't like the name synagogue, Bes Midrash, because it was too narrow in its interpretation.
They're Jewish.
Everybody understands what a temple is. No, that was for.
Oh, it did not.
That was partially political, partially
right.
Okay, but again, I just asked what you're hitting on is why I am opposed to the reestablishment of the priesthood, because there's no question that the priests became very politically involved at different times. Okay, but on the other hand, you have to answer the question: the whole Josianic reform that takes place, or Hezekiah before him, was a radical redefinition of what Israelite practice was. It was a very severe ideology, given the reality of the time. Today we would call it extremism, right? It's what it is. And in fact, we mentioned Haredi last night, a trembling, yes. The people, we talked about the people who came back from the destruction, from the exile, and did not continue and discontinued idolatry. The ones who returned to Eretz Yisrael, and presumably the ones that stayed there, although we don't know what went on up there. But basically, they were Haredim at the time because they were shaken. They were quaking, right? And they're the Jewish Quakers, right? They were quaking because of the impact of that destruction. They were scared out of their bazookas. So they came back and didn't do it. Okay? And so when Josiah is doing what he does, he knows the history of what happened with the northern kingdom, where they had the golden calves. And the northern kingdom was much more powerful than the south. And look what the Assyrians did to it. Okay, so he's got that already behind him. Hezekiah sensed that, but he didn't have the power, or let's say seriously, just at the time, there was no opportunity to be able to do what Josiah did. But Josiah did it because he saw what happened to the northern kingdom because of their idolatry. Okay, so therefore, the taking out of the Malkat Shamayim, the Queen of Heaven, it's interesting. Was that an Asherah? It's a feminine goddess, not a male god, that was in there in addition to Hashem's presence. Okay, that's horrible from the perspective of Deuteronomy. But clearly somebody before him wasn't so bad. Now remember, Manasseh, his father, ruled 50-some years. This is the guy who offered sacrifices, possibly child sacrifices, in the valley of Hinnom to doing a Moloch worship, which is a pagan form of worship, clearly. And that's Moloch is mentioned specifically in the Torah as prohibited. So, I mean, that's how deep the idolatry hit. Now you understand the extremes of Josiah's push in the opposite direction. And the scroll that the priest found in the temple that scared him into doing this, it was, well, we would say, in fact, it was written under the influence of priests who convinced Josiah that we got to do this because otherwise we're going to end up like the North did. And it's interesting to note that Huldah, the prophetess, is the one who told Josiah. She said, "Okay, that's the horrible thing that you're trying to prevent. Guess what? You can't prevent it. You can only push it off a little bit. But eventually, what has happened beforehand was so horrible that the worst is going to happen. Try your best, but you will not see the fall of the temple." He didn't. He was killed in battle. But the next generation or two will. Okay, that's how bad it had become in the eyes of these extreme monotheists. Okay, so that's what's going on here. And it's interesting. It's an Asherah, and the Malkat Shamayim is a female. And both were verboten. Okay, so don't stand one up. I see your hand, Tybal. Just a minute. Don't establish one, again, to make it stand. Yes, lo takim lecha matzeva asher sanei Adonai Elohecha, which God hates. So no asherim or asherot, no standing stones. All right, so here we see a consensus then from Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy that such forms of practice should not be followed. Okay, QED. All right, Tybal.
So two things. One is when you were asked us, and none of us thought about Hezekiah and Josiah, and I assume that lots of us go to shul, and I thought, why didn't we think about that? And then I thought, well, it's the rabbis, because it didn't, in some sense, a certain time of rabbis didn't want people to be as literate about that because, Torah, we read the entire thing. Suvim, we have the 5 scrolls for the 5 holidays, but when you look at the Haftarot, none of them are from the historical books where it would have told us, it would remind shul goers, because you get there once or more a year, about those parts of Hezekiah and Josiah. About the idolatry that was in the temple. I mean, we have other prophets that are railing about it in general, but not those specific historical examples in Haftarah.
I'm not sure. I believe that the story of Josiah's reform of the temple.
That's a Haftarah. And where's Rick Mueller when we need him?
Right. He's not dead. He's not.
No, I know it was a joke because I know.
No, but look through the Chumash. I mean, I don't remember all the Haftarah.
I just tried to find fast and I couldn't find it anyway. And then I went to ask another.
Let me look. Let me see if I can find it after. I'll look it up afterwards. Okay.
And then the other is, and I'm not even sure if I should ask this or not, but I'll just say I'm an out-of-town member who joined in the pandemic. I've never been to Beth Am. I've only seen online. But what you just said about the priesthood, and I understand as Mara Da'atra, it's a complicated thing with Minhag of a shul. But when you were the senior rabbi, was there duchening?
No.
Were the first two aliyot called?
Yeah, the first two aliyot, it depended upon, if we needed them for families when they were b'nai mitzvah. No, and I remember one Shabbos, standing before the congregation, there was no special event. I had my regulars, okay? And among them were Kohanim. And so I said, okay, there are so many Kohanim here this morning. I want you guys to be mochel, your privilege, to give up your privilege so that we can use your aliyot for other purposes. And if there are no purposes, then you guys can have it. How's that? Do you agree? They all said yes. So that's what we followed, just out of, respect for the family trees that they represented. All right. But basically, it was a very loose kind of a commitment, not an ideologically driven one. Got it? So yes, we followed all of the readings in the Torah. In the Siddur that put all of the sacrifices in the past tense, and everybody knew my feelings about active priesthood. So I was very open about it. All right, Mark.
Given your prior comments about the contamination of worship, in both kingdoms, exile is usually looked upon as a punishment. Could it be also on the flip side of the coin, a purification of worship that could happen as a result?
I think that's what the results were hoped for, and that's what happened. Okay? In other words, the notion would be, and you can see hints at this even if you read the biblical accounts, right? It is a kind of cleansing. Okay? And it says, if you return to me, right? That's where you get the concept of tshuva. B'shavtem, you will return, then you will go back to the land. Okay? And so this was interpreted as being a cleansing. Whether that was it would appear, it's difficult to say because it was not formulated. I don't think the accounts, I'm thinking Leviticus and the curses. For example, in a sense it was, because it says, for example, that the land will get its Shemitah back. The people in their sinfulness neglected to let the land rest once in 7 years, right? Because the Shabbat principle, this is a great concept. The Shabbat principle was applied to the land just as it was to the Israelites. Okay, once in 7. So when the Israelites failed to observe the Shemitah, which apparently that happened. So the book of Leviticus says when you get sent into exile, the land will rest, and it's payback for the Shemitahs that you took away from him. Wow. There's a sense of correcting what went wrong, right? Because the curses end up with the statement that eventually you'll go back if you return. And you see the same thing in Ezekiel.
Yeah, exile was more of a spiritual experience without the land. in a way.
Yeah, but I mean, it was the purging, though. Remember, fire purges. It was in a sense of purging by fire. Think about it.
Yeah.
Disease, hunger, burning of temples, right? Killing of people. That's all a process of purging, getting rid of the evil. So in a sense, I'm quite sure in the minds of particularly the priests or those who were the sensitive monotheists, sensitive to the ideals, that's what was going on. And when they came back, they did have a sense of having purged all of that, but they were filled with fear of violating. And the book of Ezra says it explicitly. You don't want to go back into exile. That threat hung over their heads.
It was sort of stuck in a loop, because once a people returns to their land and he has a land, then the seeds of corruption.
Well, they did, but that was in a later generation. And the corruption of the priesthood, as far as we know, in the Second Temple period, occurred within the last couple of centuries before its destruction. The priests, up until we have no evidence of any railing against the priests, but you see that already. And Josephus is very adamant about that when he talks about the priests who were running the show. So, yeah. All right. Now let's see what time it is. Oh, it's only 1:07. That's great. All right, moving on. Now, we're now going to take a look at the other side of this whole process. You will find in Genesis chapter 12, okay? We're going to look at trees, altars, standing stones, Abraham, and Jacob. You ready? All right, Genesis chapter 12. Verses 6 and 7. No, stop. I'm reading my instructions. Before we do this, oh, by the way, I didn't note. I left out another source. Pardon me. I got to jump back for a moment. Monolatry, right, where you worship one God, but you recognize other gods. This is also from Kabbalat Shabbat. Don't look, just listen. This is chapter 97, Psalms, verse 7. Yevoshu kol ovdei pesel. May all the worshippers of idols be shamed. Hamit halalim balilim, who sort of praise themselves because of their worship of the idols. Hishtachavulu lo kol Elohim. Let all the gods bow down to him, bow down to God. Let all the gods bow down to God. That kind of a statement implies there are other gods, but they should be worshiping God like the Israelites should be worshiping God. Okay. And this is not a henotheism where they're part of God's court. They're just there. Ki ata Adonai elyon al kol haaretz. This is verse 9 of Psalm 97. You, Adonai, are high above all the land. Ma'od na'aleta. You are really high, al kol Elohim, above all the other gods. So this says there are other gods, okay? But you see within the Psalms themselves, there's like a debate going on. Are there other gods? Are there no other gods? Yes? No? All right? Different streams. All right, now. I'm supposed to show you, according to my notes, before we get started, all of these wonderful pictures that I made. Okay, and here we go. I have beautiful pictures of trees. You didn't know you were going to have a class on trees. So here you go. All right. So first we're going to look at the trees that are called, and here's the problem. You got two different trees here. You'll see the common denominator in the trees, and it's quite obvious. Okay, this is a terebinth. You see the terebinth? Beautiful tree, isn't it? You can see why that might be worshipped. Provide shade, right? It's a symbol of growth. Yes. So that was a tree that was worshipped. All right, here's another one. This is an oak tree. See, same kind of thing. Got it? That's an oak tree. Now, here's the problem. The oak tree can be called an Allah, Alon, Elon, Elon, or Elah. The terebinth can be called Alon, Elon, Elon, Elah. Somebody got confused between the two. I mean, isn't that strange? The same words are being used and they know what the differences are. I mean, today people can understand the differences because in different locales, different trees flourish. They all flourish in different parts of Eretz Yisrael. But the problem in trying to figure out exactly what kind of trees we're talking about is that the names are flip-flopped. Okay? But anyway, when we see trees that have these various words associated with them, these are they. And now there's a third tree, however, which is most interesting. And this is Abraham. We'll see. Remember when you'll see. Abraham makes an altar and plants this tree. He plants this tree. This is called a tamarisk tree. In Hebrew, it's an eshel, a tamarisk tree. Okay? What does this prove? This proves, and who planted the tree? Abraham. This proves that the Jewish National Fund was founded by Abraham, our forefather. He is the first Israelite to plant a tree. Got it? You heard it here for the first time. Got to learn that, memorize it. Ha, ha, ha. Thank you. I see the applause. Thank you very much. Well, at least somebody's applauding. All right. But here's the rub. Get a load of this. By the way, all these names that I've mentioned have two letters in common. Oh, thank you, Bert. Thank you. All right. Aleph and Lamed. All the trees have an Aleph and a Lamed. Isn't that interesting? What does Aleph Lamed spell?
El.
El, God. And that was the pagan god El as well. The chief honcho, the big guy. Okay? But now, look at this is a tamarisk in bloom. You ready? See what you think about this guy. What do you say now? Wow. Isn't that
gorgeous?
Isn't that beautiful? Notice that pinkish reddish. So here's the thought. And this is an invention of my brain as of an hour and a half ago. I will take full credit or full rebuke for it. Eshel, El, the fire of God. Look at the tree in bloom. The fire of God. How about that one?
Beautiful.
Yeah. But I mean, the name, the Aleph falls out because it's both a verb, a noun, I'm sorry. It's both a letter and a vowel. And sometimes it falls out. So Aleph Shin Lamed could originally have been Aleph Shin Aleph Lamed, but it was too pagan sounding, so maybe they left the Aleph out. By the way, Aish is used in names. For example, the best example of that would be, hold on, Saul, one of Saul's son, they call him Ish Baal. And then later on, they don't like it, so they call him Ish Boshet. Baal means, Ish Baal means a man of Baal, of the god, Baal. Ish Boshet means the man of a shameful thing. So they changed Baal to Boshet. That happens a few times. But Ish here, most the Bible scholars today would say that there was a term in Canaanite called Eshbaal, fire of Baal. So this is Eshel. Could this be fire of God, of El, a pagan name, the god El? Don't know. But anyway, so
it looks like a burning bush.
In a sense, yes. But it's not a bush. That's the thing. It's a tree. Get to the burning bush later. I have theories about that one too. Okay. All right. So when we talk in trees, this is what we're talking about. All right. Okay. I have shown you that. Now let's move on.
Rabbi, may I just ask you fast?
What?
I wanted to be able to go back and look at those trees. By chance, did they come from a website called greeningisrael.com?
I found them all on my own by going to the pictures of trees. Could be. I mean, there are sites that deal with the flora and fauna of Israel. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. That's not how I found these. And it took a little probing because I read somewhere in talking about the tamarisk tree that it blossoms, and I found a website that had a picture of a blossoming tamarisk tree. Okay, so I'm just throwing it out, as I say, as a hypothesis which may have no support for at all. All right. Now, so let's look at a terebinth, chapter 12 of Genesis, verses 6 and 7. Ready? Genesis 12, 6 and 7. So, Vayavor Avram ba'aretz ad makom Shechem. So, Abraham passed through the land. Remember, he's now traveling at God's behest to a land that God will show him. He gets there, and now he's passing through the land to ad makom Shechem, to the place that was Shechem. Ad alon Moreh, to the terebinth of Moreh. Now, what does Moreh mean? Nobody knows for sure. It could mean the teaching tree. Okay? V'aknani az ba'aretz, and the Canaanites were then in the land. All right, so Vayera Adonai al Avram vayomer. God appeared to Abram and said, L'zaracha tenet ha'aretz hazot. I will give this land to your descendants. Vayiven sham mizbeach l'Adonai. And he built there an altar to God, Hanira Elav, who appeared to him. So isn't it interesting that Abraham puts up an altar by a tree that has a name to it near Shechem, which became a cultic center in Israel. There's a tree, altar by a tree. Okay? Now, it's for God, but it's interesting. What is it actually doing? Or what is the text doing? That word again, it is repurposing the pagan form of worship and shifting it over to the worship of Hashem. But it's interesting that the text is not concerned about the fact that he's doing this. He's putting an altar next to a tree. Now, Deuteronomy says that's forbidden. So clearly, Avram didn't know Deuteronomy. Of course not, the Torah wasn't given. Okay? But the fact is, you already have, but the Torah, when this was written, however, by the way, that implies that this is probably a very old tradition that was handed down, moving through the stronger pagan influence period, slowly down, until finally at some point it becomes cleansed of its paganism. The focus here is the fact that it says an altar to God, to Hashem, means this is not pagan practice anymore. This is a worship of God. But what it is doing, it is taking a pagan act of worship and transferring it over to the worship of the one God, which is exactly what the law codes forbid. Okay, so you can see I'm talking here about evolution of monotheism. It's cleansed, but nonetheless, it's present. Okay, moving on. Again, our beloved friend Okay, Avram. So then, now Genesis 13:18. Vayel Avram. Okay, he picked up his tent. Vayavo vayeshev be'elonei mamre. Genesis 13:18. He came and he dwelt at the terebinths of Mamre, Asher v'Chevron, which are in Hebron. Okay, Elonei Mamre, plural. Vayivin sham mizbeach, and he built there an altar, Ladonai, to God. Once again, now this is called a sacred grove. This was also a form of ancient pagan worship, a grove. And so in the presence of this, and this was, again, this is so prominent that the site's named for it. And there he builds a Mizbeach. And again, this is not a flourishing city, right? This is a spot it's there. And so he builds an altar to God. The same thing. This is a terebinth. Okay? Then God appears to him, verse 18, chapter 18, verse 1. Okay? And now he's speaking to Avraham, although it doesn't say that, but by verse 18, his name is changed. He's back at Elonei Mamre, so God appears to him there as well. All right. So again, you can see this is a site where God appears. And again, I'm emphasizing that this is Hebron, it became a major city. I'm not aware of a pagan worship center there. But clearly this Elonei Mamre at some point was a significant thing. Okay, now, Genesis 21:31-33. Okay, this is when he's negotiating about wells with Avimelech, the Philistine, even though the Philistines didn't exist at that time. They weren't there yet. Doesn't matter. All right, Genesis 21:31-33. Al kain kara lamakom hahu be'er shava, ki sham nishba'u shnehem. So therefore they called the place Be'er Shava, the well of the oath, because there the two of them took an oath. Vayikretu Brit, and they made a covenant, Be'er Shava and Beersheba. Vayakam Avimelech ufichol sar tzva'o, and Avimelech and his general Fichol got up, Vayashuvu el Eretz Plishtim, and they went to the land of the Plishtim. Now, what this probably means, I mean, the authors of the Bible knew that the Philistines weren't there back then. I'm pretty sure they knew that. But by calling it Eretz Plishtim, it's the land. In other words, they lived in the area that later on would become the land of the Plishtim. That's the only thing I can understand here. Okay, now, Vayita Eshel be'Be'er Sheva, Vayikra sham b'Shem Adonai, right? And there he planted a tree. No, there's no Mizbeach, no worshiping. Okay. He planted a tree in Beersheba, and he called out the name of God. So in a sense, he's sanctifying this place with an eshel, one of those big trees. Even though there's no sacrifice, he's associating God's name with the place. So he's worshiping God with the tree that he planted. Okay? So here you have an example of this tree worship, of incorporating this in a benign way into the stories of the patriarchs. All right, one more, and this is Isaac. Okay, he didn't plant trees, but he also comes to Beersheba. All right, so he goes up to Beersheba, chapter 26 of Genesis, verses 23-25. Okay, Vayal Misham Beersheba. So he goes from there to Beersheba. Chapter 26, 23-25. Vayera elav Adonai, God appears to him. Balalahu, that night. Vayomer Anochi Elohei Avraham Avicha Al Tira. I am the God of Abraham your father. Do not fear, ki itcha anochi, for I am with you. Uverachticha, I will bless you. V'herbeiti et zaracha, I will increase your descendants. Ba'avor Avraham abdi, for the sake of Abraham my servant. Verse 25. Vayiven sham mizbeach. He built there an altar, Vayikra b'shem Adonai, called God's name. Vayet sham ohalo. He planted his tent. Vayikru sham abdei Yitzchak be'er, and they dug a well. Okay, all right. So he builds a mizbeach in Beersheba. Now, and calls the name of God. No tree. But what they've done, archaeologists found a large horned altar at Beersheba. It was reconstructed with 7 well-dressed stones found in secondary use in the walls of the later building. This altar attests to the existence of a temple or cult center in the city, probably dismantled during the reforms of King Hezekiah around 710 BCE. But it would appear the Beersheba cultic center was later reconstituted because Josiah again tears it down. 2 Kings 23:8. So he brought in, I'm translating from what Josiah did. Josiah around 620. Vayaveh kol hakohanim, all the priests, me'arei Yehuda. Right, he gathered up all of the priests in these sites throughout the city, the cities of Judah. Vaytamei et habamot, and he defiled the bamot asher kitru, which they had sanctified with incense. Shama hakohanim. Okay, migeva ad Beersheba, from Geva, which would be in the north of Judah, to Beersheba in the south. So clearly, Beersheba had become a cultic center. All right. Now, excuse me. So we see here that Abraham in particular is associated with these kinds, with the trees, and that Isaac is associated with putting an altar at a place that later became a worship site for Hashem. There's no idolatry here, but it was one of the worship sites that King Josiah closed down because they became places where idolatry may have crept in. We don't have evidence that they crept into all of them, but it would seem that what it indicates, of course, is that it was widespread. All right, we're stopping here. Excuse me. We will continue this next week. We're going to, excuse me, we will look at matzevot, at standing stones, and this is going to really knock your socks off because it really gets hot and heavy, okay? And more trees and further references, et cetera, et cetera. So you're continuing to get a sense, I hope, here of the evolution of monotheism that takes place based upon the texts in the Bible. And we will be ending up this discussion by looking at the prophets around the time of the destruction of the temple to see what they tell us that bothered them in the same vein. Okay? All right. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom. It's early, but nonetheless Shabbat Shalom. An early wish for Purim. Happy Purim. We're about a month out now, give or take, whatever. And other good things. And stay healthy.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.